Tonight, we begin our journey with a man whose life was so full of bizarre accidents, it feels almost like a tall tale told around a campfire. But every single detail is true. This is the first episode in our series of the unluckiest people in history, where in each episode, we explore the strange and often unbelievable lives of those who seem to attract misfortune at every turn. Today's story is about Frane Selak. Born in 1929 in Croatia, he lived an ordinary life, or at least he tried to. In his early years, there was nothing to suggest the string of misfortunes that would follow him. He grew up in a modest household surrounded by rolling hills, quiet rivers, and the close-knit rhythms of a small European town. As a young man, Frane was known among friends for his calm manner and gentle humor. He wasn't the sort to go seeking trouble. He became a music teacher, spending much of his time with students, guiding them through melodies and harmonies. He loved simple pleasures, a good cup of coffee, time with family, and long walks through the countryside. Yet, for reasons no one could explain, fate had chosen him for something far more unusual. In January 1962, his first brush with death arrived without warning. Frane was traveling from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik on a train. The train, crowded and rattling along icy tracks, felt like any other winter journey. Outside, snow fell in heavy, silent sheets. The passengers huddled in coats, sipping tea and sharing quiet conversation. But as the train reached a mountain pass, disaster struck. The icy rails sent it skidding, and in a sudden bone-jarring moment, the carriages plunged off the track, tumbling into the frigid river below. The shock of the cold water stole the breath from his lungs. Metal groaned and twisted as water flooded the compartments. Dozens of passengers were trapped. Frane managed somehow to break a window and pull himself free, thrashing through the freezing current until he reached the shore. His fingers were numb, his vision blurred, but he was alive. That day, 17 people died in the river. But Frane, soaked and shivering, staggered up the bank. The first of many times he would walk away from disaster when others could not. At the time, he didn't know it was only the beginning. And a year later, in 1963, Frane found himself in another situation where the odds seemed impossible. This time, he was far from the icy rivers of Croatia. He was high above the clouds. He had never been fond of flying. There was something about the hum of the engines, the way the world dropped away beneath the window, that left him uneasy. But travel was necessary, and so, reluctantly, he boarded a small plane bound for Rijeka. The aircraft was a modest propeller-driven model, the kind that carried only a handful of passengers. The weather was clear, the sky calm. Inside, there was polite conversation, the occasional rattle of a coffee cup against its saucer. Everything seemed routine. Then, somewhere over the mountains, the right engine gave a cough, a sound so small and strange that at first no one reacted. But a moment later, there was a second cough, then silence. The propeller stilled. In seconds, the cabin filled with panic. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and tense. A sudden gust jarred the plane, and the fuselage groaned under the strain. Without warning, a door near the rear of the plane blew open. The wind was a screaming wall of cold, and in that chaos, Frane was pulled from his seat. Thrown into the open air, he didn't remember the fall in detail, only flashes, the blur of the horizon spinning, the feeling of weightlessness, the certainty that this was the end. But fate intervened in the strangest way. His fall was broken by a haystack in the middle of a farmer's field. The landing was brutal. He was bruised, battered, and shaken, but he stood up. Behind him, the aircraft crashed into a rocky hillside, killing 19 people. Frane was one of the few survivors. If the train accident had been improbable, this was something else entirely. Most people would never survive a fall from the sky. But for Frane Selak, fate had decided otherwise. You might think that after two such close calls the universe would leave him in peace, but the years ahead would prove otherwise. In 1966, while driving along a narrow mountain road, Frane's car suddenly lost control. The brakes failed without warning, and the vehicle veered into the guardrail. The metal gave way, and the car plunged toward a river. The second time, water would try to claim him. The current was swift and cold, battering the car as it sank. Somehow, Frane forced the door open and swam to the surface, gasping for air. The car vanished into the depths. He climbed the riverbank, coughing, exhausted, but alive. Years later, in 1970, another car accident nearly claimed him. This time, a fuel pump malfunction caused flames to erupt beneath the hood while he was driving. In seconds, the interior filled with smoke. Frane threw himself from the moving vehicle, rolling onto the gravel roadside. Behind him, the car burst into a fireball. 2 years later, in 1973, it happened again. Another vehicle fire, another narrow escape. By now, friends had stopped calling these incidents bad luck. They were starting to call him the man who cannot die. And yet, Frane himself never bragged about his survival. He simply shook his head, as if each event was just another strange turn in a life he didn't fully understand. But fate wasn't finished with him. By the mid-1990s, Frane Selak was no stranger to misfortune. The train had taken dozens, but not him. The plane had fallen from the sky, yet he had landed in a haystack. Cars had burned, and rivers had swallowed him, yet he still walked away. To outsiders, it was a bizarre kind of miracle. To Frane, it was simply life, unpredictable, strange, and sometimes cruel. In 1995, another strange day came. Frane was driving through the Croatian countryside, the road curving through gentle hills and scattered farmland. It was a quiet drive, the kind where you notice the hum of the tires and the sway of the steering wheel. Ahead, a bus was approaching from the opposite direction. It was large, painted in faded colors, and moving far too quickly for the bend in the road. As the two vehicles drew closer, the bus suddenly swerved into Frane's lane. With only a second to react, he jerked the wheel. The tires skidded, the car shook violently, and the guardrail loomed on his right. The vehicle broke through and plunged down a steep embankment. Trees whipped past his windows, branches cracking against the frame. And then, stillness. The car had landed in thick brush, cradled just enough to keep from rolling further. The bus driver never stopped. Frane crawled from the wreckage, his hands shaking, his clothes torn, but his body intact. Another escape. Another notch in a growing list of close calls. Only a year later, in 1996, misfortune struck again, this time in the most dangerous way yet. He was driving through the mountains when a large truck approached from the opposite direction. Something went wrong. The truck veered toward him, its massive grille filling his windshield. Instinct took over. He swerved hard, the tires screaming in protest. The car skidded toward the edge of the road, and then there was nothing beneath the wheels. Frane's car plummeted off the cliff. The world tilted. Sky became ground. Ground became sky. Somehow he was thrown from the vehicle before it hit the bottom. He landed in the branches of a small tree growing from the cliffside, which bent under his weight but did not break. The car, meanwhile, exploded in a burst of orange fire far below. Hanging from that tree, his heart pounding in his ears, Frane realized just how close this one had been. If the fall hadn't killed him, the fire would have. And yet, here he was, still breathing. For most people, such a string of survival stories would be the stuff of legend. But Frane's life wasn't finished with its strange turns. In 2003, at the age of 74, something entirely different happened. For one out, it was not disaster, but fortune. He bought a lottery ticket, not his usual habit, but something he did on a whim. When the numbers were called, Frane Selak the man who had survived so many near deaths, discovered he had won more than $1 million. It was as if, after decades of chaos, fate had decided to hand him a reward. Frane didn't keep the money for long. Within a few years, he had given most of it away to friends, family, and causes he believed in. Money can't buy happiness, he said in interviews, and he meant it. After all, happiness for him was simpler. A quiet day, a warm drink, and the absence of another accident. In the end, Frane Selak's life was not defined only by disaster, but by survival. Across more than 7 decades, he endured a train derailment into icy waters, a fall from the sky into a haystack, multiple car crashes, fires, and even a plunge off a cliff, each one a moment that could have ended everything, and yet, each time, he walked away. In his later years, Frane lived quietly, far from the attention his stories sometimes brought. His survival, he often said, was not a gift to boast about, but a reminder of the fragile, unpredictable nature of life. Some called him the unluckiest man alive. Others, the luckiest. Perhaps the truth was somewhere in between. In our next episode, we'll meet another survivor, a woman who faced 3 of the most infamous disasters at sea and returned each time. Her name was Violet Jessup. Thanks for tuning in.